My name is Sunil, and I was thinking, why are we quantifying ourselves? And hopefully one of the reasons is because we want happier, healthier relationships. So I was thinking about my own personal health and my own personal story, and I realized that I actually make a very good longitudinal study for looking at health with inside and outside of relationships. So I was single as an adolescent. I got married at 23 until I was 30, then single from 30 to 40, married at 41, and then single again, and I'm 51, I'll be 52 in a few months. And you can also study age effects. I've been divorced twice, I have 2 children by 2 different women, I was living in San Francisco, in Boston, and now in San Francisco, and I was a graduate student when I first got married, and so on. And being high-functioning Asperger's, I've also been collecting lots of data on myself since I was a teenager. So in addition to having all the usual cholesterol and blood pressure checks, I've been very rigorous about keeping track of my percent body fat and so on. And so we can actually start to look at, if we orient ourselves here at this time, and this is just on a rough scale, married regions are green, steady single relationships are pale green. We can start to see some patterns emerging. We can start to see some cycles, perhaps, emerging here. I can plot my resting pulse rate, compare that before, during, at the end of a marriage, and so on. And you can start to see there's some weak correlations, for example, between resting pulse rate and body fat, but not as strong. HDL and LDL levels, and again, just to orient yourself, LDL is blue, so lower is better. HDL is red, so higher is better. So in general, we can start to look at these patterns and see are there places where we can see any kind of correspondences. And I'm showing you high-level data. I have all of the detailed data in Excel spreadsheets. Same thing with blood pressure. We can start to look at how blood pressure fluctuates, and let me tell you, it fluctuates a lot, particularly in certain situations. And then we can start to annotate this, so I can provide a little bit of historical information. So you can see when I first started practicing martial arts, that sort of type of high-intensity interval training has a very dramatic effect on heart rate, resting heart rate, basal heart rate, also very good at bringing down percent body fat. You can see as you go into stressful, completing my PhD, one of my parents dying, start to see things start to creep back up again. Moving, having a child has some effect, but you see a high effect upon my first divorce. One of the things that happens when you start training for a marathon is you meet lots of other marathon athletes, so you start dating one of them. And one of the strongest influences on my personal fitness is dating very fit people, as we'll come back to see. And you can start to see that these sort of trends and cycles have a kind of flow to them. In particular, things like you can look at economic effects. When you're working all the time, you meet somebody at work, you marry them. And so you can start to see, and some of you probably already noticed this, but there were a couple of areas of correlation, and I picked out two bands here when I was particularly fit, and I call these regions of deep focus, because I was really fit, and the observant ones of you will notice that correlates to being in a steady relationship. And I think part of that is if you're in a steady relationship, you want to stay fit and stay healthy for your partner, but you never know when the relationship may end, right? So you don't want to take things for granted. There were 2 other zones here, and this is again sort of high-level data where you can see these are areas of fairly good fitness. They weren't at quite the same level that I was in steady relationships. And again, you see a correlation with the early stages of marriage. I call this zone of excitement. It's like, you're married, you're sex on tap, meals every night, everything is going really well. And so things are going pretty well. And of course, then you get into the later stages of the marriage, and as you can see, some of these markers are going up, some of these markers are going up, and the HDLs are going down. And if you look at the data a little bit more closely, and I'll show you the summary data, I can't call this the plateau of complacency. It's kind of, you're sort of in that stable place. Again, it's dinner every night, but maybe you're starting to take things for granted a little bit, letting yourself run to fat a little bit, and that sort of seems to happen. And then this is what I call the saddest slide in this display, and these are the regions where I'm not married, not in a steady relationship, just going to pieces, right? So body fat percent body fat goes up, resting heart rate goes up, HDL levels start to crash downwards, and I call these the troughs of despondency. So this is kind of like that. Not married, not in a steady relationship, not really dating anybody, not really knowing if I'm going to be dating anybody, staying up till 2 in the morning eating frozen burritos and watching reruns of Battlestar Galactica. And then you can actually look at trends. I've just abstracted out now those regions, so this sort of deep focus region. And it's kind of interesting because you can actually see that while there is an upward trend as my age increases, there's still actually pretty decent numbers. And we can actually compare those primary fitness with the secondary fitness. So here we're seeing primary fitness, and then when I was really super fit, dating the triathlete, pretty dramatic differences. Then stopped dating the triathlete and was in another relationship, reasonable, and then going back down again. Then these are the declining fitness periods. These are in the later stages of my first and second marriages. And again, you can see numbers starting to creep up again. And it's quite interesting how dramatic they are. And then if you look at the significantly unfit periods, really significant changes, which actually correlate very well with each other, but only correlate very somewhat loosely with age. So there's both good news and bad news in this data. It's like a lot of this stuff is reversible, although there is a general upward trend over time. So the good news is peak fitness correlates with steady relationships, dating extremely fit people, and I think this is part of the social proof, at least for me. Some of the bad news is the usual things, but one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is children leaving the home doesn't necessarily have a negative effect. It can actually have something of a positive effect because you're sleeping in again. And for me at least, I held track to my stable relationships very closely. Anticipation of a relationship is a very strong indicator of health for me. Marriage kind of mixed, unstable not so good, but the worst is not having any relationship at all. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. What an interesting talk. Let's just open it right up. I'm sure there's some questions.
Yes.
Just quickly, how did you track those body, the body fat and all the different things you were tracking?
So percent body fat was just caliper measurements, simple caliper measurements done by a professional, not by myself. Blood test for cholesterol. I measure my own basal pulse rate. Heart rate.
And how often?
It kind of varies. So everything is at least annually, but some things are 6 monthly, and in terms of pulse rate, actually weekly, monthly. Yes?
Okay, so when you train, do you have to train with a group in order to do the event, or are you able to just take a plan and do it yourself? I'm just curious.
Are you training, the question is, are you training with a group or are you training by yourself?
I generally train on my own. Actually, that's a good question because I was talking about social proof, but I think for me, I'm kind of a self-starter. I need the social incentive, but then I'm able to train on my own pretty intensively.
So how does it correlate then that, if you're in a relationship, your performance improved? Because technically, what you just told me is actually the opposite. Is that you can do the event without the relationship and reduce your body fat.
So let's just repeat the question. The question is, if you're training alone, how does that match with your description of being in a relationship correlating with your fitness? Is that right?
Yeah, so it is complex to tease it out. And actually, there is one marathon that I trained for where I was not in a relationship, which kind of probably flashed by in the data, so you didn't pick it out. So yes, I can reduce body fat by training on my own, but I do much better in terms of reduction of all of those parameters when I'm in a relationship than when I'm not in.
Now, I want to sneak in a question here.
Sure.
One of the things that's interesting to me is to see how much you learned from a very simple time series analysis. Just plot the data, the time on. What else, did you manipulate that at all? I mean, you're showing us the end product of the analysis in a slide, but these are very informative graphs. Did you do something, was there a stage that led you up to getting those insightful graphs, or was that pretty simple? You just said, okay, let's just plot it against time, and there it is.
I pretty much just plotted it against time. There's actually a lot more data than that are in the summary graphs. So I haven't done a statistical analysis, how strong are those correlations, what's the p-value? I don't know that. So
Right.
it is much more qualitative than quantitative.
But that's kind of neat. I mean, we've seen a lot of that, and that's just a nice thing that you can just plot the data on a graph against time and get something that's meaningful out of it.
Absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And I sort of had a vague perception of what I determined, but when you actually see the data, it's quite
Right, okay, there's a couple over here.
Yeah.
So if you know you're going to be in bad shape if your relationship's going south, are there things you can go ahead and do beforehand to go ahead and rectify that? I mean, you madly go out looking for a new good relationship?
Yeah, I wish I had answered that question, but I don't.
Will you change your behavior now that you know this information, and how will you change your behavior?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. For me, at least, that social connection is such a strong thing that I don't know how much I can change. I can try to be around other extremely fit people, and hopefully one of them will date me, and maybe that's the way to do it. But I think, at least for me, that social behavioral change takes place when I'm around other very fit or very healthy people. Lots of other questions. How about you?
What would you say the health benefits are of dating say a future volleyball team?
Well, why did you do that and present it at the next Quantified self?
Let's take some more.
Do you see a correlation with the amount of sex you're having?
Yeah, I knew that question was going to be asked. I didn't, because I haven't quantitated that, so I didn't plot it. But you can interpolate some of that from those areas of complacency, and then the slots of despondency. So those are surrogates for how much sex
Okay.
I am or I'm not having.
Let's get, you want to give a question?
Yeah, so it's interesting to me how you look at this as an observer, as if the whole time you were just a scientist looking at someone else. How could you look at your own numbers going up and your own shape getting out of shape this much and not doing anything about it? How did it feel like to you?
Did everybody hear that? Just the question was, you act like when you look at this data, you were a scientist looking at somebody else, but the data was telling you were becoming unfit. Why didn't that motivate you to do something about it?
Yeah, and that sort of goes back to the answer I gave to the previous question, which is, and I think this is a big issue with all kind of behavior change. Just looking at the data is not sufficient. You have to have the behavioral influence. So for me, the behavioral influence is social graph. Right? That's a much more powerful motivator for me to change than just looking at numbers. Yes, sir.
So the psychological benefits of exercise are well understood.
Sure.
So given that, and I'm not that familiar with your data, I wonder if your causality is reversed. If when you're fit, you're a happier, nicer guy, and more likely to be involved in a relationship.
Yeah, no, that's certainly, and I have no way of measuring, or I had no way of measuring when I was happy. Right? And there's other data to show that men are happier in stable relationships, I think more so than women. I don't have that data, so but I agree with you that is.
So that's a kind of deep question. Did everybody hear that question? Yeah, the causality is complex. Let's take one right in the middle there. Yes, you.
I'm just curious, it sounds like you've been doing this for a long time. What was your original motivation or kind of vision when you started collecting this data? What did you have in mind?
Why did you start originally?
Well, I started collecting data about myself. It's kind of interesting. When I was 17, I heard that Bjorn Borg had a resting pulse rate of 32. And I was just determined to bring my resting pulse rate to 32. And I never accomplished it, but I got down below 40 at one point. So that was just something that stuck in my mind. But I had no idea at 17 that I would be married twice and two single and everything else.
Were there any tricks other than fitness that brought your resting heart rate so low?
So yes, so there's a lot of very specific exercise. So high intensity interval training, very good at bringing down resting heart rate, and very good at lowering LDL. Aerobic training, marathon training, very good for raising HDL. Not so good for lowering resting heart rate.
Okay, one more we have time for.
At the back? Yeah, you.
Well, for one thing, you're kind of scaring me that my insurance rates are being correlated to my Facebook status. But my actual question is, it's pretty well documented that the fitness levels and the eating habits of people that you are friends or in a relationship with, affect your own, are pretty good predictors of your own fitness and,
right.
and whatnot.
Okay.
Were you able to suss out the effect of fit girlfriend versus unfit girlfriend? Or did you have a big enough sample?
I don't think I have a big enough sample size.
Okay, that's good, we're out of time. Thank you,
Okay,
Sunil,
all right.
so much for your work.